Hello, my name is Ann Dorn. I'd like to introduce you to my husband, David, father of 5, brother of 12, grandfather of 10, friend to thousands. He was the most kind, dedicated, loving life partner I could have hoped for. He had a big smile and a heart to match. He was blessed with the gift of gab, and that gift enabled him to touch souls and inspire people, especially young people. Oh, how kids loved him, and they really loved him back. Dave was all about service. He served 38 years in the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department and 6 years as chief of police as the Moline Acres Police Department. After 44 years, he retired from law enforcement, but he never retired from helping a friend in need. Since he befriended every person he met, he was a very busy man. One example of that was his friendship with a young man named Lee. David met him when Lee was just a kid, after members of his family were attacked and murdered. Dave took a special interest in the boy. They bonded, and their friendship grew and remained strong throughout the years. Lee eventually opened a pawn shop. He trusted Dave implicitly and asked Dave to help with security. David readily agreed. Whenever the shop's alarm would go off, the alarm company called Dave. He would investigate. If he got a call after I went to bed, he would wake me up and tell me he was going to Lee's, just to make sure everything was all right. Most of the time they were false alarms, triggered by a storm or animals. But I never rested easily until I heard Dave's key turn in the door, knowing he was home safe. The alarm that went off the morning of June 2nd was for real. It was a violent night in St. Louis. 4 officers were shot. Others were hit with rocks and fireworks. At least 5 businesses were damaged, looted, or set on fire. As the Officer Wellness Coordinator and CIT Coordinator with the police department, I was keenly aware of the rioting and spent the evening getting ready to mobilize support for officers who were impacted. After I'd gone to bed, David received a call from Lee's alarm company. The front door of the pawn shop had been breached. This time he didn't wake me up to tell me. He probably knew I would have tried to stop him or insist on going with him. As I slept, looters were ransacking the shop. They shot and killed David in cold blood, and then live streamed his execution and his last moments on earth. David's grandson was watching the video on Facebook in real time, not realizing he was watching his own grandfather dying on the sidewalk. I learned of all this around 4 a.m. when our doorbell rang. The chief of police was standing outside. I wondered why Dave had not answered the door. It wasn't uncommon for him to be up watching TV at this time. I called out to him several times. There was no reply. He just wasn't there. I led in the chief, and fighting back tears, he uttered the words every officer's spouse dreads. I relive that horror in my mind every single day. My hope is that having you relive it with me now will help shake this country from this nightmare we are witnessing in our cities and bring about positive, peaceful change. How do we get to this point where so many young people are callous and indifferent towards human life? This isn't a video game where you can commit mayhem and then just hit reset and bring all the characters back to life. David is never coming back to me. He was murdered by people who didn't know and just didn't care. He would have done anything to help them. Violence and destruction are not legitimate forms of protest. They do not safeguard Black lives. They only destroy them. President Trump understands this. has offered federal help to restore order in our communities. In a time when police departments are short on resources and manpower, we need that help. We should accept that help. We must heal before we can affect change, but we cannot heal amid devastation and chaos. President Trump knows we need more Davids in our communities, not fewer. We need to come together in peace and remember that every life is precious.
First 2020, and this is the 17th episode of New Paradigms. I am your host, Sargis Sangari, the Republican nominee for U.S. Congress in the 9th Congressional District of Illinois. As you know, today my guest is my good friend, Sergeant Ann Dorn, who is the wife of the late retired Captain David Dorn. And as you heard, in the early June 2nd, 2020, he was killed. He was murdered by an individual looting a pawn shop. The incident occurred during the protest in St. Louis, Missouri over the killing of George Floyd. And David were together for nearly 30 years and is still an active officer with the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department and has been for 27 years. She is currently still the wellness coordinator for the department. She is known as Mom to many of her officers and members of the community, and recently helped organize a peace march in St. Louis and continues to hold them to bring attention to the senseless violence that she spoke about that are plaguing our country and killing so many innocent victims and police officers. And welcome.
Thank you, Sargis. It's been a long few months since my husband died, but we're continuing to hold peace marches. The violence is not getting better. It's only getting worse across the country. Murders are at all-time high in St. Louis. I believe this morning we're at 197. We've surpassed our total numbers for last year. The victims there's a lot of innocent victims, there's a lot of children, and we've had 2 police officers killed this year. Well, 1, and then my husband, who is retired. It's been a whirlwind since he's died. He was the love of my life. I'll never get him back. And I miss him very much, but I can never let his memory be in vain. I cannot let him die in vain. He's got some big shoes to fill. I'll never be able to fill them, but I'm going to do what I can to get the silent majority of St. Louis, of our country, to stand up and just say enough. We're done. We have to stand up to this violence. We have to stop what's happening. The silent majority can no longer be silent. They have to have a voice, and they have to speak up. They have to stand against the terrorists, the anarchists, these groups that are just taking over or trying to take over our communities. We have to do better. We have to start with ourselves. We have to remind ourselves that everyone has a right to an opinion. Everyone has a right to vote however they want to vote. Everyone has a right to live life the way they want to live it. And if you disagree with it, you disagree with it. Just go on. There's no need for violence. When did we start resorting to violence in our communities because of a difference of opinions? We have to find out when that happened. We have to teach our children it's okay to disagree with someone. It's okay to have your own viewpoints. It's okay to have your own religion and your own opinions. You don't have to fight someone just because you don't agree with them. Sit down and talk. Communicate. We have to do better. That's all I can keep saying to myself, is we have to figure out a way to do better. I started the Peace March to try and get that communication open. I opened it to all members of the community, every walk of life, every background, every political view, every religion. I just wanted everyone to come together and hear the words and join me in trying to proclaim peace in St. Louis. We have to take our city back. We have to take our cities back, our communities back. We have to take our country back before we completely lose it.
And I know it's not easy. I know it's very difficult. I can just imagine what you had to go through, especially on that night. And I don't know how a wellness officer can really deal with these issues herself. On the night that he was killed, how did you deal with receiving the news as a wellness officer?
Not very well. I didn't take my own advice. I think I went into shock. Luckily, I had a lot of family and friends that were with me to get me through the first several days to weeks. I was numb, but then I tried to turn around and help my officers who were shot that night. That was one of my main concerns is they're still here with us. I have to take care of them. And I reached out to them to help them. And then they were just worried about me. And I just begged them to let me help them because it helps get my mind off of it. This is David with his newest granddaughter when she was born just earlier. He was so happy that day. He's so proud of all his grandchildren. This is what I will say our son. It's David's son, but I call him our son. It was his wedding. We had a wonderful time. All the family was there. He was a very proud dad. This is the day we were invited to the White House by President Trump after David died. Two of his sons, Brian and Keelan, and his baby daughter Larissa, who's in the black and white dress. We spent 4th of July at the White House. Those other two young ladies are my daughter-in-laws, or my daughters, as I call them. They're not in-laws, they're family. We had a great time there.
I want our audiences to know that it's not just the fact that you had to deal with your own husband's death, but you had to deal with 4 officers being shot. And for those who don't understand what the police have to deal with on a daily basis, it's not easy. We're talking about a family. You're still serving within the Metropolitan Police Department of St. Louis. So you have to be dual-hatted, and you have to deal with the consequences of trying to also support those families whose officers, loved ones were shot during the protest. And I know that we heard the speech you had delivered. It was broadcast during the Republican National Convention. What have you been able to get support of? What are we looking at, the possibility of how maybe to resolve some of the issues that have possibly led to why we are talking today about his death?
With our Peace March, we've been able to bring people from all walks of life together. We continue to do it. The night of our Peace March, unfortunately, we had another young officer shot and killed. He was a father of 3. I've reached out to that family to help the best I can. But we have to continue. We have to continue with our message. The violence hasn't stopped. So we're just going to continue to try and bring the community together. I'm reaching out to as many people as I can. Different faith backgrounds, different organizations. We're just trying to come together and stand up to the violence. We have to figure out a way to stop it. I believe this was the day of David's death that President Trump tweeted out a very respectful message to the family about David dying. It was a beautiful sentiment that they gave, and he reached out to the family and gave his condolences and offered any support we needed. It was pretty amazing.
I know it's private, but how has the family dealt with it? Is there an end goal that they're looking at? Something, maybe a legislation, some kind of a organizational structure that might um, allow you to take some steps to be able to maybe get this message out in a way to maybe start healing the communities?
Sargis, we really haven't thought that far ahead yet. I mean, the kids are, 3 of the kids are supporting, and they're just pushing, they want peace. They don't want his death to be in vain. Where I'm talking to everyone. I've talked to Eric Schmidt, our Attorney General. I've talked to the governor. We just I continue to talk to anyone who will listen to me of any kind of legislation we can get to stopping these terrorist acts that are occurring in cities.
I know that David had actually on that night, from what has been said through the surveillance, that he was trying to actually talk those young men from stopping what they were doing, but they did not listen. I know there's been an arrest in the case. Is there anything you could share with us as to where we are today?
I believe there's been 6 arrests in the case. Everyone has had a grand jury indictment. There's 2 gentlemen. One, Stephen Cannon, is being held for murder first, and several other charges associated with the crime, as well as another young man is being charged with murder second for being with Stephen Cannon, and I believe driving the car that Stephen was in the night of the murder.
Is there a timeline that they may have shared as far as how long it takes for the process? I know you're a police officer, so are we talking about months away or years away from having a resolution?
We're probably going to be a year out or more. They're trying to catch up with the COVID cases. The court shut down. So it's going to be a year or more probably before we have any resolution.
I know you were here supporting us just this past weekend in Chicago with Back to Blue rally, especially thanks to Ashley Ramos, who was able to set it up and get you up here. Does it help in the healing process as you see other officers and other venues to be able to talk about David's life and how it may have impacted others?
Oh yes, it's we were in Kansas the week before, and then we were just in Chicago this past weekend. I'll talk to anybody who will listen to me right now to try and get this message out. I mean, if Dave's story has touched so many people across the country, I've heard from people all over the world actually who've seen my RNC speech, who heard about David. And I'll go personally if they invite me. However, if I can get there, I'll get there. I'll talk to them and try and get this message out. It's just we have to stand up. Again, the silent majority can no longer be silent. They have to stand up and say enough's enough. And, I had a great time again. Thanks to Ashley for inviting us. She came down for our St. Louis Peace March, and we returned the favor. And I say we because Kimberly Kowalski is my partner in this. She's a fellow widow who lost her husband several years ago. He was shot in the line of duty. Jeffrey Leadbelly Kowalski was shot in the stomach 5 times. He survived his injuries at that time, but took 20 years. He developed cancer and eventually died of his initial injuries. Kimberly's been fighting for legislation. So,
and I know a lot of people don't know that it takes a long time sometimes for these officers who succumb to their wounds, and the system is not set up to be able to support even the spouses. And I know that we're going to have Kim in a future show to talk about what you and her are trying to fight for, specifically in St. Louis, to try to get some changes to legislation that allows at least a much more broader perspective on how to support those spouses, because, as being a member who served in the U.S. military for 20 years, we've brought back a lot of soldiers who were injured. And, people don't understand. You have an individual who has life disabilities, who's a 230-pound gentleman, and you have a wife who might be 100 pounds, having to deal with that individual on a daily basis to be able to help them out. And a lot of the services that should be out there are just not out there to be able to help them.
No, we're trying to get the workman's comp laws changed. We're trying to get disabilities changed. We're trying to get death benefits, acknowledged that, these guys don't die always right away. Thankfully we get those extra years with them, but financially, I hate to say it, if they die instantly, then the benefits are there. If they don't, then workman's comp forgets about them. Sometimes some agencies forget about their officers, and they suffer or they get bankrupt, and financially they struggle. The families struggle. They try to figure out where their next meal is going to come from because bills are coming in and they're not being paid. So we have to change our laws. We have to change the rules, and we have to recognize that these officers who are injured in the line of duty, sometimes, well, I can't say sometimes, they're always, their entire life is changed. Whether it's a catastrophic injury or, I don't want to say minor, but a survivable injury, and a lot of them can come back to work, but they still have issues later on in life.
No, it definitely isn't easy. And it's unfortunate. Sometimes the system can be cold and cruel in the process, especially with what the spouses are dealing with. And what are you looking at in just the near term? Where do you think you want to be just in the short term as far as this movement is concerned that you're working on? And I know you haven't thought through the long-term process. Still, you're through going through the grieving process of it. But what do you want to achieve in the short term?
I'd like to open our dialogue in the city, get both sides of the aisle talking, get the government or the community leaders talking with the citizens more. We have to get back to more community-based events. They keep talking about defunding the police to support more social services. We have social services out there that aren't even being utilized. And we have plenty of social services. We just have to use them. And we have to put people in contact with them to get what they need. And if we can get that information out to everybody, I believe that would help as well. So we have to get everybody talking together so they know what's available out there.
Is there a timeline you're looking at for getting back to work? How does that process work for you? What has the commander said? What is some of the advice you're getting from the family?
My family's supporting me no matter what. They stand behind me 100% in whatever my decisions are. My commanders would like me back at work sooner than later to continue the work. I'm a unit of one. I'm the only one who does the work I do. But I don't know. Healing is different for everyone. And I don't know when I'll be able to come back to work to be able to fully function at the level I need to be. It'll probably be part-time for a little while, for sure. But this is helping me. This talking to people and getting my message out is helping me heal.
Well, Ann, again, it's you're a good friend, and it's hard to see your friends go through what they're going through. Same with Kim. We're hoping that possibly we could make some legislative changes. I'm hoping if I do get into Congress that I could start addressing some issues. I know some of the organizational structures out there that have caused some of the violence that we're dealing with are just receiving money from the wrong sources. But it is what it is, and we're going to have to try to address it to the best of our ability.
Well, Sargis, when you get in office, what do you plan on doing? Are you going to try and do something about these organizations? Are you going to look into them?
Yes, I mean, look, we've talked about this before. I know that it was maybe the first time you had heard where I talked during the Back to Blue rally that, we've had even commanders on the ground in 2015 that was killed in Syria, and we had Antifa guys on the ground operating. It's a shame. I know that there's some open source series that are now starting to highlight what is happening with these organizations, whether it be Antifa or BLM. It's not good when we have foreign dollars that are pouring into these organizations because foreign dollars are not interested in what is happening to us on the streets as Americans. The sad part is that some of the banks are allowing these transactions to take place, that even when the U.S. government tries to go after them, it makes it very difficult for us to be able to stop the use of those banking systems and institutions. But it is a reality of what we have to deal with on a daily basis. From my perspective, I have to tell you that on the banking issue, I have said multiple times that we have to stop the financial support of these organizations. So, if I was in, first of all, I would encourage the law enforcement to try to move away from seeking the easy deferred prosecution agreements that they push for usually, the DPAs, as you know, being personal law enforcement, which all those have the appearance of being tough on these type of white collar crimes that exists out there due to the what are the large amounts of penalties that might be levied against these financial institutions. But in reality, as you know, and I know, that they don't amount to anything but maybe a few months, if not a few weeks of profit for some of these banks and institutions. And it clearly hasn't had the intended goal of discouraging these type of activities that are occurring, that are affecting, as you had said in your talk at the RNC, us across the country. And so as an alternative, I would enforce criminal prosecution against individuals. And there needs to be some accountability at least. Otherwise, the indictments will merely become nothing more than a government tax against banks every few years when they get caught. And I would also consider enacting bipartisan legislation that would end the incorporation possibly of anonymous shell companies that are out there. This may be to include it. You can include it in the National Defense Authorization Act, which would be one of the most significant pieces of legislation that would have an immediate impact on combating this type of money laundering that is taking place. And then finally, I think improve the public-private partnerships between our law enforcement, like your units in St. Louis, and the financial institutions by really increasing the funding. As you said, we talked about defunding the police. We got to increase the funding for hiring, training of even the U.S. Treasury Department, including specifically the Financial Crime Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, that you have been privileged to see how they're operating as far as how money is flowing to these organizations, and the suspicious activity reports, or the SARs, that are filed by financial institutions and shared with the U.S. government agencies. Is critical. These are critical to protecting our national security and the integrity of the U.S. financial system. So as an example, even overhauling the database that is used for SARS filing is long overdue, but those are systematic issues. And I know it's hard, especially when you're dealing with something so personal But all I could do from my end and for my friend is to at least try to address it through a system process to make sure that we don't allow individuals on the ground to continue to do what they're doing, because officers are still being killed. Even when you guys had
Yes.
your march, even on your march, they killed an officer, and they will continue to be killed until we finally do something about it. I know we were in Kenosha recently, and I know you insisted on us getting up there. What was your
Yeah.
impression of Kenosha? What is something that is common maybe between Kenosha, Chicago, and also St. Louis, where David lost his life?
Blue is blue. We're all family. It doesn't matter what town you're from. We're going to love each other no matter what. We're going to care for each other no matter what. We we all share the same background. We all care for our communities. I had to get up to Kenosha. You know, they're the most recent ones, and they've seen a lot of violence for such a small community. And to have the type of violence they're experiencing and not have the manpower or equipment to deal with it and defend themselves is just, for me, it's kind of scary. We have the manpower and equipment, and we still get overrun sometimes, but to not have the manpower and equipment, that they needed that night, and they had, one of their commanders was severely injured. It breaks my heart, and, if I could be there to help them in any way, I will be.
I know we might be planning on going up there sometime in October. I know you have some
Yeah.
special dates coming up, and what are the special dates that are coming up for you specifically?
Our next Peace March is going to be Tuesday, September 29th, 7:30 p.m. We're going to have another Peace March in honor of Tamaris Bohannon, the young officer who was murdered on August 29th. And then we have a third Peace March, October 29th, which is David's birthday. We haven't decided on a location yet, but we're going to celebrate his birthday in style. And maybe October 29th, we may be back up in Kenosha and have a peace march for them, candlelight vigil, something in honor of them, and help heal their community. I'm sorry, Sargis, I can't hear you.
The archangel that protects the men in blue and the women in blue are the same.
Oh, that's right. October 29th is St. Michael's Day and the Archangel's Day. That's Kimberly's forte with that one. That's her specialty. But it's St. Michael's Day on the 29th. We didn't realize that when we picked the day. But that has a special meaning for police officers. The 29th for us is going to be special. We're going to have Tamaris Bohannon's family with us. We're going to have his sister, his wife, his children. His sister's going to sing for us. Their pastor's going to come pray with us. We're going to start at the Cathedral Basilica where his funeral was, and we're going to march down to St. Xavier's, which is St. Louis University. Has special meaning to us as well. But like I said, that's Kimberly's specialty, so Kimberly's going to probably cover that with you when she speaks to you.
I do know that we're looking at specifically
Yeah.
and
Yes?
Hello, my name is Ann Dorn. I'd like to introduce you to my husband, David, father of 5, brother of 12, grandfather of 10, friend to thousands. He was the most kind, dedicated, loving life partner I could have hoped for. He had a big smile and a heart to match. He was blessed with the gift of gab, and that gift enabled him to touch souls and inspire people, especially young people. Oh, how kids loved him, and they really loved him back. Dave was all about service. He served 38 years in the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department and 6 years as chief of police as the Moline Acres Police Department. After 44 years, he retired from law enforcement, but he never retired from helping a friend in need. Since he befriended every person he met, he was a very busy man. One example of that was his friendship with a young man named Lee. David met him when Lee was just a kid, after members of his family were attacked and murdered. Dave took a special interest in the boy. They bonded and their friendship grew and remained strong throughout the years. Lee eventually opened a pawn shop. He trusted Dave implicitly and asked Dave to help with security. David readily agreed. Whenever the shop's alarm would go off, the alarm company called Dave. He would investigate. If he got a call after I went to bed, he would wake me up and tell me he was going to Lee's, just to make sure everything was all right. Most of the time they were false alarms, triggered by a storm or animals. But I never rested easily until I heard Dave's key turn in the door, knowing he was home safe. The alarm that went off the morning of June 2nd was for real. It was a violent night in St. Louis. 4 officers were shot. Others were hit with rocks and fireworks. At least 5 businesses were damaged, looted, or set on fire. As the officer wellness coordinator and CIT coordinator with the police department, I was keenly aware of the rioting and spent the evening getting ready to mobilize support for officers who were impacted. After I'd gone to bed, David received a call from Lee's alarm company. The front door of the pawn shop had been breached. This time he didn't wake me up to tell me. He probably knew I would have tried to stop him or insist on going with him. As I slept, looters were ransacking the shop. They shot and killed David in cold blood, and then live streamed his execution and his last moments on earth. David's grandson was watching the video on Facebook in real time, not realizing he was watching his own grandfather dying on the sidewalk. I learned of all this around 4 a.m. when our doorbell rang. The chief of police was standing outside. I wondered why Dave had not answered the door. It wasn't uncommon for him to be up watching TV at this time. I called out to him several times. There was no reply. He just wasn't there. I let in the chief, and fighting back tears, he uttered the words every officer's spouse dreads. I relive that horror in my mind every single day. My hope is that having you relive it with me now will help shake this country from this nightmare we are witnessing in our cities and bring about positive, peaceful change. How do we get to this point where so many young people are callous and indifferent toward
I know it's not easy, and I know it's difficult, but with all that said, if people want to help with the Peace March, how can they find out more, where they can go to help you?
We currently have a Facebook page. It's Peace March St. Louis 2.0 is our event page, or just Peace March St. Louis is the page. Is the Facebook page. The QR code at the bottom of the screen will take them to our fundraiser page. We are currently raising money just to help pay for logistics, whether it be a sound system. We're still paying for shirts we purchased up front that we are selling. They're also linked on the page. And we're not asking for a lot. Anything someone can give to help us out. But the little bit of money that we do get goes straight to just helping us pay for having the events.
And I would ask our listeners if they see at the bottom of the page there's a QR code, please support Ann's mission. I'm hoping that one day we are going to be speaking about David's foundation that could be established to bring people together. And I know you're still going through the process of how you want to envision what the message should be, but it will come to you. Sometimes it takes time. But keep moving forward, Ann. I'm here as your friend, and I know it's not easy, but we will try our best to do what we can from this end. I know that the 29th is also the first presidential debate that will take place. Who knows, maybe all the stars are aligning for a reason. And I'm hoping that I could get into Congress on November 3rd. And if I'm there, definitely you will have a seat of honor at the table to include all the other law enforcement partners. As I said, when the Chicago Fraternal Order of Police gave me their endorsement, that we will make sure that they have a seat of honor at the table, and we have to bring domestic tranquility to our nation. I wish I could do more, but I'm here anytime you need help, and we will try our best to support your organization and foundations.
Thank you, Sargis. It's when you get into office. We need more people like you in office to support us and to help bring our communities back together.
Thank you, Ann. I'm going to give you the last word if there's anything else you want to share.
Yes, enough is enough. The silent majority has to speak up. We have to come together as a community with love and respect in our hearts and just start talking again to one another. Peace March 2020 2.0 is in St. Louis, September 29th, 7:30, Cathedral Basilica. Please join us if you're available. We welcome everyone. No one's excluded. And Sargis will have you in office.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you. With God's blessing, everything is possible.
Yes.
Thank you very much for our listeners. Thank you for being here with us. Please, prayers for Ann and Kim. And please keep them in your thoughts and prayers tonight. God's blessing, and God bless you all. This is New Paradigms.
The founders of this nation did not create a land of opportunity by growing government. They did it by reducing its powers, particularly when the government of the King of England did not provide them with representation. The U in the United States originally was not capitalized, but the S in states was, meaning that the states were like semi-sovereign nations. Governance was more local and solutions were often more interpersonal rather than political. We have moved into an age where politicians act like agents of a larger special interest rather than representatives of the people, and as a result, liberty has been compromised. With your help, Lieutenant Colonel Sangari can fight this corruption and end this Middle Eastern non-democratic mentality of keeping an official in his or her seat for life, or replacing them by their own hand, pick subservient, and finally start focusing on collective American effort on actually representing the needs of all the constituents in the 9th Congressional District, including Democratic and Independent Americans, for our benefit, and not to advance the position of a single political party or person in our America again, advocating for honoring and empowering the American dream for all. Vote Sangari, honoring and empowering the American dream.
I am Sargis Sangari, and I approve this message.